Hey there. Before you slip into oblivion, hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, your future self will thank you. Ever wondered what it was like to live in a time when healthcare meant bloodletting and dining out could lead to being served a side of roasted rat? Well, buckle up, because we're diving headfirst into the bizarre and grotesque world of medieval and ancient oddities. Imagine this, it's 1550, and instead of a cozy night in, you're facing the grim reality of being burned at the stake for the crime of witchcraft, because apparently, being a woman with herbal knowledge was a capital offense. Or how about the time in ancient Rome when emperors hosted lavish feasts that could only be described as gluttony gone wild? They literally purged just to eat more. What's your poison? Drowning in a vat of wine or being crushed by a giant statue? But wait, there's more. Ever heard of the dancing plague of 1518? Yep, a whole town just couldn't stop dancing, and no one knows why. Talk about a party gone wrong. And let's not forget the medieval practice of trial by ordeal, where you might have to stick your hand in boiling water to prove your innocence. Because, who needs due process when you have divine intervention, right? Throughout this episode, we'll explore bizarre facts and specific dates that will make your skin crawl and your jaw drop. Why did people think that bathing was a sign of weakness? When did it become a trend to stick leeches on your body? Spoiler alert, you might want to have a barf bag handy. So, turn on loop so this episode repeats until you fall asleep, if you can manage to doze off while contemplating the bizarre ways our ancestors lived. Ready to dive into the madness? Let's go. The Roman Senate. A grand institution with its marble columns, togas, and a healthy dose of political intrigue. But before we dive headfirst into the drama of Cicero and the conspiracies of Caesar, let's take a moment to revel in the absolutely electrifying, no, let's not kid ourselves, dull history of Roman Senate quorum counting procedures. Yes, you heard it right. The riveting saga of how many senators it took to make a decision on which toga to wear on a Tuesday. Early records, a dull start. Our story begins in the mythical mists of time, somewhere around 509 BCE. Rome was in its infancy, and the Senate was a sprightly institution, comprised of a mere 100 patricians. Now, you might wonder, how did these early senators decide on matters of state? Spoiler alert, it wasn't with a thrilling game of rock paper scissors or even a rousing game of dice. No, it was all about the numbers, specifically, the magical number of 30. Yes, that was the original quorum, a mere 30 senators present to conduct business. Imagine the scene, a dusty Senate chamber filled with prominent men in togas, one senator yawning while another counts heads. 1, 2, 3, now, wouldn't you have loved to be a fly on the wall for that riveting moment? What could possibly be more exciting than counting senators? Perhaps watching paint dry on the Colosseum? The expansion, 450 BCE and the Quorum Quandary. Forward we hop to 450 BCE, when the 12 tables were established. A momentous occasion. You might think this was when the Romans figured out how to count all the way to 450. But no. The quorum remained stubbornly at 30. And yet, there was a sense of urgency. With Rome's expansion, the Senate began to grow like a weed in a neglected garden. By 300 BCE, we're talking about around 300 senators. One can only imagine the chaos of counting them all. Can you picture it? Senator Maximus, are you here? Senator Lucius, where are you? Anyone seen Senator Gaius? He's probably off at the baths. The quorum and the chaos, 200 BCE. By the time we reach 200 BCE, the Senate is practically a full-blown circus, with 600 senators bustling about. The quorum still languished at 30. Perhaps the senators figured if they held a low quorum, they could save on wine for those who showed up. How else could they justify that endless supply of vintage Falernian? But wait. With the Punic Wars raging, the Romans realized that perhaps they should up their game. In 146 BCE, they decided that a majority of those present is, well, a good idea. Enter the new quorum, a simple majority of those present. You know, just in case they needed to decide on sending another fleet off to battle while half of them were busy debating the merits of different toga draping techniques. Absurd anecdotes, the counting conundrum. Now, let's pause and appreciate some of the truly bizarre practices that emerged during this time. Picture this: during a particularly heated debate, one senator, let's call him Senator Flavius, decides to take a leisurely stroll around the Senate chamber to count heads. He gets so into it that he forgets to count himself. Or how about the infamous quorum capers of 63 BCE, when a senator named Catiline, famous for his poor life choices, decided it would be hilarious to sneak into the Senate late, wearing a disguise as a statue. Yes, you read that correctly. He thought he could pull off a statue stunt during a vote. Unfortunately for him, his toga got caught on a piece of furniture, and he toppled over. Spoiler: he was not elected Best Supporting Actor. The turn of the century, 44 BCE, and the death of Caesar. Fast forward to the fateful year of 44 BCE. Julius Caesar, the man with the most dramatic backstory ever, was assassinated, and the Senate was in disarray. Imagine the chaos. Not only was there a shortage of senators, but quorum counting became a matter of life and death, quite literally. With Caesar gone, the Senate had to decide how many senators they could even trust to make decisions. They bumped the quorum up to 50, half of 100, if you will. Call it a dramatic increase in caution. But did that stop the intrigue? Oh no. It merely fueled a new fire. Senators were still sneaking in and out, counting heads like it was a game of Where's Waldo? The reforms of Augustus, 27 BCE. Enter Augustus in 27 BCE, a man with a plan. He established a more organized Senate and, in doing so, put a twist on the quorum. Now, a quorum was defined as 2/3 of the Senate, which offered a nice little cushion. If half of them were busy trying to figure out who was going to be the next emperor, the other half could carry on with their toga discussions. But let's be real for a moment. What were they really discussing? Toga styles. Senate seats. How to best avoid being stabbed in the back. Oh, the irony. Curious practices, counting and voting. Now, let's delve into the peculiar methods employed to count those all-important heads. Have you ever wondered how they counted senators in a room full of togas? The answer is a bit of a head-scratcher. They employed a system of senatorial rolls, a fancy term for calling names. Senators would respond, and the clerks would keep track. You might call it an ancient version of roll call, but with more drama and less efficiency. And let's not forget the voting methods. Oh yes, they had a few gems up their sleeves. On one hand, there was the senatorial show of hands, where senators would raise their hands for yes or no votes. Picture the chaos, like a game of Simon Says, but with far more at stake. On the other hand, there was the ballot box, which was a much more civilized option. But did they have the luxury of secrecy? Nope. Everyone could see how you voted. What's a senator to do? Play it cool and vote with the crowd or risk being the lone wolf? The decline and fall, 3rd century CE. As we roll into the 3rd century CE, the Roman Empire is starting to show signs of wear and tear, much like a toga that's seen one too many wine stains. The Senate's power dwindled, and with it, the quorum mattered less and less. By now, the quorum was a mere shadow of its former self. The once proud Senate was reduced to a handful of senators who were either too loyal or too frightened to leave. The quorum was practically a suggestion at this point: hey, if you're here, let's vote. The final act, a legacy of quorum counting. And so, dear reader, we arrive at the end of our tale, where we've journeyed through the annals of boring quorum counting in the Roman Senate. From the humble beginnings of 30 senators to the chaotic counting of the 600 strong, the legacy of Roman quorum counting is as rich as the wine they drank. As we reflect on the absurdity of it all, one must ask, was any of it really necessary? Did the Romans spend more time counting heads than actually governing? Why did they not just opt for a delightful game of charades instead? In the grand tapestry of history, the Senate's quorum counting may seem dull, but it was a crucial part of the machinations that kept Rome running, albeit a bit wobbly at times. So, the next time you find yourself yawning at a meeting or counting the minutes until it ends, just remember, at least you're not in ancient Rome, where counting heads could lead to a toga-wearing riot or, even worse, an awkward encounter with a senator in disguise. ### The dull history of Roman Senate quorum counting procedures. The Roman Senate, the very heart of Roman governance, was a complex institution that managed affairs with a mix of political maneuvering and bureaucratic drudgery. Among its many functions, one of the most tedious yet crucial was the counting of the quorum necessary for a meeting to commence. A quorum, defined as a minimum number of senators required to conduct official business, was vital for ensuring legitimacy and authority in decision-making. The procedures surrounding this process were anything but thrilling. However, let's delve into the insipid intricacies of how these counts were carried out, with all the gusto of a Roman orator, minus the drama. ###Construction methods, materials, and costs. The physical setting of the Senate was the Curia, where senators gathered to deliberate. The construction of the Curia, originally built in 509 BCE, was a blend of Roman engineering and architectural ingenuity. Made primarily from local limestone and, later, brick, the building underwent several renovations, particularly during the reign of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE, who made it more grandiose and functional. As for costs, the Roman Senate had its own budget, funded by state revenues, taxation, and the spoils of war. The renovation under Caesar, for instance, is estimated to have cost several 100,000 sesterces, an astronomical sum. The senators must have felt like their meetings were funded by the spoils of conquest rather than the fruits of their labor. In fact, one might say that the only thing more inflated than the costs of the Curia were some senators' egos. #bureaucratic rules and punishments. When it came to quorum counting, the bureaucratic rules were as rigid as they were dull. A quorum was set at a minimum of 100 senators, out of the roughly 300 to 900 who could hold the title of senator at any given time. The process for counting these senators before a meeting began was formalized by the Lex Cornelia in 81 BCE, which established not only the quorum requirement but also the procedures for counting. The counting was performed by a designated group known as the viri selecti, selected based on their perceived reliability and loyalty. The Senate had strict rules about who could be counted. Absences due to illness or travel were noted, but if a senator was deemed to be absent without leave, they could face penalties ranging from a fine to public humiliation. Imagine being called out for your absence in front of your peers. What a way to ruin a toga. If the quorum was not met, the meeting could not proceed, and senators would have to wait until the necessary number arrived, often leading to a lot of grumbling and idle chit-chat. If you thought waiting for a bus was tedious, try sitting around in togas, debating the merits of public works projects without enough people to make a decision. #roles and job descriptions. Within the Senate, various roles were established to facilitate the counting process. The most notable among these was the praetor urbanus, who presided over the Senate meetings and was responsible for ensuring that quorum was met before discussions commenced. This role was not just ceremonial, it came with the responsibility of calling the viri selecti to perform the count. The viri selecti themselves had a rather mundane job description. They were to stand at the entrance of the curia, tallying the senators as they entered. Their counting methods were primitive by today's standards, using simple abacuses or even tally sticks made from wood. This was no high-tech operation. If a senator snuck in the back, well, good luck counting him. Additionally, there were scribi, or secretaries, who recorded the proceedings and were responsible for noting who was present or absent. It was their job to keep meticulous records of meetings. After all, a senator's reputation could hinge on a single absence. Imagine the pressure of being that guy who forgot to write down Cicero's absence. You might as well have thrown yourself into the Tiber. #Technical specs and inventories. The technical specifications of the counting process were far from revolutionary, yet they were crucial in ensuring the stability of the Senate. Each senator was expected to wear a toga, the traditional garment of Roman citizens, making identification straightforward, but also leading to a lot of discussions about fashion. Why is that senator wearing white? Doesn't he know that's last season's color? Senators would enter through designated gates, and the viri selecti would mark their attendance on wax tablets, which were portable and reusable. The tablets could be easily erased and rewritten, allowing for quick adjustments if a senator decided to make a dramatic entrance halfway through the count. The tablets, however, were prone to damage. One particularly rainy day in 123 BCE saw the records of attendance wash away, leading to a chaotic and contentious meeting. Furthermore, the counting was typically done using a simple system, 1 mark per senator. If more than 100 marks were recorded, the quorum was met. If not, the meeting was adjourned. It was about as exciting as watching paint dry, but it was necessary for maintaining order in the Senate. ######. The impact of quorum on legislative decisions. The quorum counting procedure had significant implications for legislative decisions. If a quorum was not reached, pressing matters could be delayed indefinitely. This could lead to considerable frustration among senators, particularly when urgent matters, like funding for military campaigns or response to foreign threats, were at stake. The delays could be politically motivated, of course. If a senator felt they were losing a vote, they might simply forget to show up. Even more amusingly, some senators would intentionally arrive late, fashionably late, if you will, just to ensure that a quorum was never reached on certain contentious issues. Thus, the Senate found itself embroiled in a game of political chess, where attendance could be as pivotal as the votes themselves. #######. Notable incidents and anecdotes. History is replete with examples of senators using the quorum counting process to their advantage. In 63 BCE, during the Catalan conspiracy, a meeting was called to address the threat posed by Lucius Sergius Catilina. The urgency was palpable, but as the viri selecti began their count, it was noted that several senators had conveniently decided to take a long lunch. The meeting was delayed, allowing Catiline to further his plans, demonstrating how the very process designed to prevent chaos could sometimes contribute to it. Another amusing incident occurred during the Senate's debate on the expansion of the Roman road system in 49 BCE. In a bid to ensure a quorum, a senator from a rural province arrived with a dozen of his constituents in tow, claiming, "They are my entourage." The viri selecti had to diplomatically explain that only actual senators could count toward the quorum, much to the chagrin of the enthusiastic farmers who had hoped to witness the grandeur of political discourse. #####. A legacy of dullness. Quorum counting in the Roman Senate embodies the paradox of governance. The necessity of order and structure often leads to the most mundane of procedures. While the Senate itself was a hotbed of political intrigue and philosophical debate, the procedures that governed its meetings were often tedious and bureaucratic. From construction methods to the roles of senators and the technical specs of counting, the Senate's quorum counting was a microcosm of Roman governance, rigid, methodical, and sometimes absurdly comical. It serves as a reminder that even in the grand tapestry of history, the mundane must be acknowledged. After all, if the Romans could endure the monotony of quorum counting, perhaps we can endure our own bureaucratic drudgeries today, with a little humor, of course. ### The dull history of Roman Senate quorum counting procedures. ### Introduction. The Roman Senate. A revered institution known for its monumental debates and political maneuvering. Yet, lurking beneath the grandeur is a labyrinth of procedures, specifically, the often overlooked, mind-numbing details of quorum counting. This discourse will delve into the construction methods, materials, bureaucratic rules, roles, technical specifications, and a dash of wit to keep you awake. Fasten your togas, let's dive into the dull history of Roman Senate quorum counting. ### Construction methods, materials, and costs, circa 509 BC. The Roman Senate, established in 509 BC, was initially a modest assembly of patricians. However, as the Republic expanded, so did the Senate's infrastructure. To count a quorum, typically a simple majority of at least 50 senators, the Senate required a space that could accommodate the increasing number of members. 1. Construction methods. Stone and marble. The Senate met in the Curia, the Senate House, constructed primarily of stone and later adorned with marble during the time of Julius Caesar. Wooden platforms. Temporary wooden platforms were often set up to accommodate the rising numbers of senators during heated debates. Open air versus enclosed spaces. Initially, meetings were held in the forum or open-air spaces, but as procedures became formalized, enclosed spaces became necessary. 2. Materials. Local marble, sourced from the nearby hills, it was a status symbol as well as a building material. Timber, imported from Gaul for structural reinforcement, this came at a hefty price, especially during the timber shortage of 50 BC. 3. Costs. Initial construction of the Curia was estimated at 2 million sesterces, money well spent, considering the amount of bickering that would ensue within. ### Bureaucratic rules and punishments, circa 200 BC. By the 2nd century BC, the Senate had developed a complex bureaucracy to enforce rules regarding quorum counting. Here's a glimpse into the dull yet essential regulations. 1. Quorum definition. A quorum was established at 50 senators, later adjusted to 60 during the tumultuous years of civil strife. 2. Counting procedures. Censors, appointed every 5 years, censors were responsible for the enrollment of senators and the counting of quorum. They used a method called numerus to ascertain the presence of senators. Attendance records. Senators were required to sign an attendance sheet, a practice that would make modern-day corporate HR weep with envy. 3. Punishments. Fines. Senators who failed to attend without a valid excuse faced fines of up to 1,000 sesterces, equivalent to a month's salary for a lower-ranking senator. Public shaming. Persistent non-attendees could face public censure, which was a fate worse than death in Roman politics. Imagine being booed by your fellow citizens while attempting to enjoy a quiet evening in the forum. Hashtag roles and job descriptions, circa 100 BC. Quorum counting required various roles, each with its own tedious job description. Senators had their hands full, and let's just say, they were not there for the fun of it. 1. Censor. Responsibilities: oversaw the census and attendance records, ensuring that quorum was met before any votes could be cast. Additionally, they had the power to remove unworthy senators from the rolls. Fun fact: the phrase censor comes from their power to censor behavior, highlighting how the Romans valued decorum over decibels. 2. Presiding officer. Responsibilities: often a senior senator, the presiding officer called the assembly to order and confirmed that quorum was met. They wielded considerable power to stifle unruly debates. Think of them as the ultimate party pooper. Witty aside, if the presiding officer had a dime for every time they said, "Can we please focus on the quorum?" they would be richer than Crassus. 3. Lictors. Responsibilities: accompanied senators to ensure their attendance and enforced order during sessions. They carried the fasces, a bundle of rods symbolizing authority, perhaps a bit much for just counting heads. Job description: lictors were essentially the bouncers of the Senate, ensuring that no one sneaked in or out during the crucial counting process. Hashtag technical specs and inventories, circa 50 BC. As the Roman Senate evolved, so did the technical specifications for counting procedures. By 50 BC, the Senate was more sophisticated, requiring strict adherence to a set of specs. 1. Attendance tablets. Material: wax tablets were used to record attendance. Senators would scratch their names in using a stylus, a very ancient form of signing in. Inventory: each session required at least 10 tablets to accommodate all senators. A lost tablet was like losing a modern-day laptop, catastrophic. 2. Counting rods. Specifications: simple wooden rods were often used to tally present senators. Each rod represented a senator, and they would be placed in a designated box once attendance was confirmed. Design: the rods were usually 1.5 feet long, ensuring they were not too cumbersome during the counting process. What a design triumph! 3. Seating arrangements. Senators were seated in a semicircle, which made it easier for the censor and presiding officer to see who was present. The Romans were centuries ahead in their understanding of ergonomics, at least for seating. Hashtag the evolution of the quorum counting process, circa 27 BC. With the rise of the empire and the transition from republic to imperial rule, quorum counting underwent a transformation. By 27 BC, the Senate had to adapt to new political realities. 1. Changes in quorum size. The quorum shifted to 60 senators to accommodate the increased size of the Senate body. Augustus, in his quest for efficiency, streamlined procedures, much to the chagrin of traditionalists. 2. Increased bureaucratic oversight. New roles emerged, including tribunes, who could veto decisions if the quorum was not met. This was akin to having a modern-day HR department ensuring compliance with attendance policies, just without the coffee breaks. 3. Technology adaptations. Introduction of abacuses for tallying votes and attendance. This simple device allowed for quicker calculations but still required a dedicated scribe to manage the process. The advent of ink, thanks, Egyptians, improved record-keeping over wax tablets, which had a tendency to melt under the Mediterranean sun. Conclusion, a droll yet vital component of governance. While the intricacies of quorum counting in the Roman Senate may seem dull, they underscore the significance of order and structure in governance. Each procedure, each rule, each role was designed to ensure that the Senate could function effectively, even if it meant enduring the monotony of counting heads and recording names. The Roman Senate is a testament to how even the most mundane procedures can shape history. So, the next time you find yourself reluctantly counting the number of attendees at a meeting, remember the legacy of the Roman senators who endured far worse. After all, if they could count heads while debating the fate of the Republic, surely you can endure another hour of conference call chaos. The dull history of Roman Senate quorum counting procedures. The Roman Senate, that venerable institution of ancient governance, has a reputation for grandeur and eloquence. However, beneath the drama of Cicero's speeches and the machinations of ambitious senators lies a realm of procedural minutiae that could put even the most ardent political junkie into a deep slumber. Specifically, let's delve into the quagmire of quorum counting procedures, a topic so riveting that it might just make watching paint dry feel like a thrill ride. Construction methods, materials, and costs. To understand the intricacies of quorum counting, we must first consider the physical environment in which these procedures took place. The Senate met in the Curia, a structure built of stone and wood. The Curia Julia, completed in 29 BCE, was the most famous iteration of this meeting place. Constructed primarily of tufa and marble, it stood as a testament to Roman engineering prowess. The costs of building such structures were substantial, with estimates suggesting that the Curia Julia alone may have run into the hundreds of thousands of sesterces, funds that could have otherwise provided a lavish feast for the entire citizenry, assuming they didn't mind a bit of gruel. The construction methods varied, but Roman builders utilized a technique called opus cementitium, Roman concrete, which allowed for durable buildings capable of withstanding the test of time. In the case of the Curia, the interior was adorned with intricate mosaics and sculptures, which added further to the expense. It's ironic that a space devoted to the minutiae of governance was itself a monument to extravagance. Bureaucratic rules and punishments. Once the Senate convened in this hallowed venue, the first order of business was to establish whether a quorum was present. A quorum, in Roman terms, was typically defined as a simple majority of the Senate, which at its height comprised around 600 members. This meant that a minimum of 301 senators had to be present for the Senate's decisions to be deemed valid. Now, you might wonder, what happens if the number of senators present falls short? Enter the bureaucratic nightmare that was Roman procedure. If a senator was found sleeping, or worse, absent, during a vote, they could face various penalties. In some cases, fines were levied, while in others, a senator could find themselves publicly shamed. The Romans had a flair for the dramatic. After all, nothing says, "You failed your civic duty," like being dragged before your peers in shame. To keep track of attendance, a clerk was appointed to count and document each senator present, often using a wooden tablet called a tabula. The counting was not simply a matter of raising hands. Senators were often required to register their presence formally. Miscounts could lead to chaos, and who wouldn't want to be the one responsible for invalidating an important vote? Imagine the dinner conversations. "Oh yes, I was the one who miscounted and let the cataclysmic decree pass. My bad." Roles and job descriptions. The roles within the Senate were not limited to the senators themselves. A whole hierarchy of officials existed to ensure that procedures were followed, and quorum counting was no exception. The presiding officer, known as the consul, played a crucial role in overseeing the proceedings. The consul had the authority to call for a vote, but only if a quorum was established. Their job description was expansive, but we could summarize it as follows. 1. Presiding officer, consul, responsible for calling meetings, ensuring proper procedures were followed, and maintaining order. Often the target of senator grumbles. 2. Clerk, lictor, tasked with counting the senators present and maintaining the official records. They were the unsung heroes of the Senate, akin to the person who ensures the conference call starts on time, only with more togas and less caffeine. 3. Senators, the primary actors in this drama, responsible for debating and voting on policies. They were often more interested in power plays than in actually counting heads. For aediles, these officials had a hand in maintaining the curia and organizing public games. While not directly involved in quorum counting, they were essential for keeping the building in good condition. After all, no one wants to meet in a crumbling edifice. 5. Censors, responsible for maintaining the list of senators and their respective statuses. They played a crucial role in ensuring that only the eligible were counted during quorum assessments. It's worth noting that the Senate's bureaucracy was so complex that it could rival a modern governmental agency. If you ever find yourself complaining about red tape, just remember, at least you're not trying to get a quorum in ancient Rome. Technical specs and inventories. Now, let's dive into the technical specifications of quorum counting procedures. The Roman Senate employed a straightforward method to determine attendance, a simple head count. However, this process was rife with potential pitfalls. The Senate's clerks used a method called numeratio, which involved calling out names from a roll and tallying those present. The inventory of tools used in this process was minimal yet effective. 1. Tabulae, wooden tablets for recording attendance. Imagine a giant chalkboard, but instead of clever doodles and random thoughts, it was filled with the names of senators who were probably too busy plotting their next political move. 2. Stylus, a pointed instrument used for inscribing names on the tabulae. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a computer mouse, only less ergonomic and more prone to splinters. 3. Wax, used on the tabulae for easy erasure and re-recording of names. The Romans knew that political alliances could shift like sand, and they needed a way to adapt without a full reprint of the scrolls. 4. Counting stones. These were small pebbles used by clerks to keep track of the numbers visually. If you've ever played a game of counting stones with your siblings, you can appreciate the simplicity of this method. With all these tools at their disposal, one might think that counting a quorum would be a breeze. Alas, even the most straightforward procedures can become labyrinthine when politics is involved. Senators would often arrive late, fashionably, of course, making the counting process a game of who's here, who's not, and who's pretending to be elsewhere. Witty asides. As we meander through this dry landscape of Senate procedures, it's worth pointing out that the Romans had a knack for the dramatic. They could turn even the most mundane affairs into epic tales. One can only imagine the senators whispering in hushed tones, "Will they make it to quorum?" Tune in next week for another thrilling episode of As the Senate Turns. Another thought: if today's politicians faced the same quorum requirements as their Roman counterparts, they might spend less time on Twitter and more time actually showing up for work. Who knew that a simple headcount could be the key to responsible governance? Conclusion. In summary, the history of Roman Senate quorum counting procedures is a testament to the complexities of governance, layered with bureaucracy and the occasional dose of human folly. From the construction of the curia to the roles of various officials, every aspect of this process reflects not just the political climate of the time but also the cultural values that permeated Roman society. Despite its apparent dullness, the story of quorum counting in the Roman Senate is rife with lessons about the importance of participation, accountability, and order in governance. As we explore ancient Rome's political landscape, we find that even the most tedious procedures can reveal much about the society that practiced them. And so, dear reader, the next time you find yourself counting heads at a meeting, remember, you're not just engaging in a mundane task, you're partaking in a tradition that has echoed through the ages. Just don't forget to bring your stylus. ### The dull history of Roman Senate quorum counting procedures. The Roman Senate. A bastion of political discourse and oratory passion that, at its heart, was governed by the rather tedious process of quorum counting. While gladiators fought ferociously in the Colosseum, the senators were engaged in a very different kind of battle, one where the stakes were less about blood and glory, and more about who could muster enough bodies to pass a motion. Let's delve into the surprisingly intricate and often mundane world of quorum counting in the Roman Senate, exploring construction methods, bureaucratic rules, job descriptions, and more. ### construction methods, materials, and costs. The Roman Senate met in the Curia, a structure that underwent several renovations throughout the Republic and into the Empire. The original Curia Hostilia, built around 616 BC, was constructed using a mixture of tuff, a volcanic stone, brick, and timber. By the time of the late Republic, the Curia had become a grand edifice, with marble and lavish decorations that would make a modern politician envious. 1. Materials. Tough, lightweight and easy to manipulate, ideal for early construction. Marble. The Romans were particularly fond of marble, which symbolized power and permanence. Timber, although less durable, it was crucial during the initial phases of construction and for interior furnishings. 2. Costs. The costs varied dramatically over time. In the early Republic, a modest curia might cost around 200,000 sesterces. By the late Republic, marble and elaborate decorations could push costs into the millions, a sum that would require the collective coffers of several wealthy senators to fund. In all fairness, the real expense was not just in the building but in maintaining the quorum to actually use it. Picture a grand hall adorned with the finest Roman artwork, but empty because too few senators could be bothered to show up. What a waste. ####bureaucratic rules and punishments. The Roman Senate had a rather stringent set of bureaucratic rules that governed how a quorum was counted and what constituted proper attendance. 1. Quorum definition. The quorum for the Senate was set at a minimum of 60 senators, although the Senate could convene with fewer if necessary, provided they were in the process of counting or if a specific matter required immediate attention. 2. Attendance. Senators were expected to appear promptly. Failure to arrive on time could result in a fine of 1,000 sesterces. In today's terms, that's like getting docked a week's salary for taking too long to find a parking space. 3. Punishments for absenteeism. If a senator was repeatedly absent without just cause, they could face expulsion from the Senate. The great orator Cicero once noted that he had more trouble counting absent senators than counting those present. 4. Counting process. Upon convening, the presiding officer, usually the consul, would call the roll. A dedicated group of senators known as numerarii, the counters, was responsible for tallying the attendance. They used wax tablets to record names, a process that sounds more tedious than counting sheep. ##### roles and job descriptions. Within this bureaucratic labyrinth, several roles emerged to ensure the smooth operation of Senate proceedings. 1. Consul. Role: the presiding officer of the Senate, responsible for calling the session to order and overseeing the quorum count. Job description: must have the charisma to keep senators engaged and the authority to enforce attendance rules. 2. Numerarii. Role: the official counters of the Senate. Job description: carry wax tablets and write down names, must be good with numbers, patient, and have a strong back, those tablets could get heavy. 3. Aediles. Role: officials responsible for maintenance of public buildings, including the curia. Job description: ensure the curia is in top shape for meetings, which included everything from cleaning to arranging seating. If the curia looked drab, senators might decide to skip out. 4. Praetors. Role: judges who could also serve in legislative capacities. Job description: keep the peace during contentious debates, often had to mediate when senators started throwing insults instead of ideas. 5. Censors. Role: responsible for maintaining the census and overseeing public morality. Job description: make sure senators were living up to their duties and were not spending too much time at the local tavern. Hashtag technical specs and inventories. As with any bureaucratic system, the Roman Senate had its own set of specifications to adhere to during quorum counting. 1. Roll call procedure. Senators were called by their tribes and centuries. Each senator would respond, marking their attendance in the appropriate ledger. 2. Wax tablets. Each numerarius would carry a tablet about 30 cm x 20 cm, with a stylus for inscribing names. The tablets were reusable but required regular maintenance, mostly scraping off the old wax to make space for new names. 3. Attendance ledger. A central ledger would document who attended each session. This was crucial for future reference, especially during heated debates about who should be held accountable for proposed laws. 4. Seating arrangements. Senators were seated according to rank and seniority. The more important you were, the closer you sat to the front. It was a visual representation of power. Imagine being relegated to the back row like an unwanted child at a family gathering. Hashtag the quorum counting process, a step-by-step guide. So, what did it actually look like when the Senate convened for quorum counting? Here's a lively breakdown. 1. Opening the session, 100 BC. The consul stands at the front of the curia, calling the session to order with a booming voice. Senators, we gather today to discuss the pressing matters of the Republic. 2. Calling the roll, 99 BC, the numerarii begin calling out names, and senators respond with a simple adsum, I am here. They do this in a somewhat monotonous rhythm that might put even the most ardent supporter to sleep. 3. Counting attendance, 98 BC, the numerarii tally the responses, making sure to account for those who are late or absent. All present and accounted for, except for those who clearly prioritize their leisure over duty. 4. Determining quorum, 97 BC, once the count is complete, the numerarii report back to the consul. We have 65 present, O consul. 5. Proceeding with business, 96 BC, with a quorum established, the Senate dives into discussions, often aided by oratorical flourishes that could make the most mundane topics sound like matters of life and death. Hashtag witty asides and observations. Imagine the poor numerarii, tasked with counting senators as they meander into the curia. Oh, look! Another one. Should we count him as present, or is he just here for the free wine? The curia was often filled with more drama than a Roman tragedy. Debates could get so heated that senators would forget to count themselves, leading to confusion. Wait, am I present, or is this just a figment of my imagination? Hashtag conclusion. While the Roman Senate may be remembered for its grand speeches and political machinations, the nitty-gritty of quorum counting reveals a world of intricacy and laborious detail. From construction methods and bureaucratic rules to roles and technical specifications, the mundane yet essential practice of counting senators was a vital part of Roman governance. So, the next time you find yourself in a meeting, perhaps grumbling about attendance policies, spare a thought for the numerarii of ancient Rome. At least your conference room doesn't require marble columns and a wax tablet inventory. The Dull History of Roman Senate Quorum Counting Procedures, a comedy of errors and eccentricities. Welcome, dear reader, to the riveting world of Roman Senate quorum counting procedures, a subject so thrilling it makes watching paint dry seem like a high-octane thriller. While we often hear tales of emperors tossing Christians to lions or gladiators battling it out in the Colosseum, the unsung heroes of history are the bureaucrats diligently counting heads and keeping meticulous records of who showed up for the Senate meeting. Grab your toga and settle in. We're about to dive into a delightful tale of regional variations, legal minutiae, and more logistics than you can shake a stylus at. Regional variations over time. When in Rome, count like the Romans. Let's start with the quirkiness of regional variations in quorum counting. The Romans, being the organized folks they were, needed a quorum, at least half of the senators plus one, to conduct any official business. However, the exact definition of senators could vary wildly depending on where you were in the vast expanse of the Roman Empire. In the heart of Rome, the quorum was a simple affair, 300 out of 600 senators. But venture out to the provinces, and suddenly those numbers could fluctuate like a Roman market on a Sunday. In Hispania, for instance, the Senate might have operated with a looser interpretation of attendance, perhaps only 40% of the local senators were needed for a quorum. It's as if the provincial politicians thought, why bother with all those senators? Let's just count the ones who showed up, and if they're all wearing togas, that's good enough for us. This flexibility led to some amusing scenarios. Imagine a gathering of senators in Gaul, where 25% of the senators showed up, and they celebrated this as a quorum because they had all brought their best wine. Who needs rules when you have a good vintage, one might say. Thus, the quorum became less about governance and more about socializing, a trend that would only continue to flourish in the centuries to come. Laws, edicts, taxes, and ledgers, the paperwork that never ends. Now, let's talk about the mountain of paperwork that accompanied these quorum counts. If you thought your tax returns were tedious, allow me to introduce you to the Roman Senate's record-keeping practices. Every meeting was accompanied by a mountain of edicts, laws, and, of course, taxes. Each senator was expected to sign off on various ledgers, indicating they were present, voting, or, let's be honest, just enjoying the free bread and circuses. The infamous Lex Caecilia Didia, a law passed in 98 BCE, imposed strict requirements on how legislation had to be recorded. You thought your local council had a lot of red tape? The Romans took it to an Olympic level. The Senate had to keep track of every single vote, which meant scribing down not only the names of senators who attended but also the names of those who abstained, those who checked their emails during the session, and, of course, the one senator who always managed to fall asleep before the first motion was even made. But the most fascinating aspect of this bureaucratic ballet was the use of wax tablets and styluses for record-keeping. Picture it, a Senate meeting filled with toga-clad senators, each scratching away at their tablets, trying to decipher handwriting that could only be described as post-apocalyptic hieroglyphics. The resulting ledgers were a chaotic mix of elegant script, doodles of chariots, and the occasional poorly drawn figure of a senator's cat, because, let's face it, even in ancient Rome, cats were the true rulers of households. Logistics and supply chains, the unsung heroes. Now, let's pivot to the logistics of quorum counting, a subject so thrilling it could make a seasoned accountant swoon. The Roman Senate faced a unique challenge. Getting senators to show up was akin to herding cats. This was where the logistics teams came into play. Think of them as the unsung heroes of the Senate, working tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure that enough senators were present to make decisions. In a world without smartphones, text messages, or even a reliable postal service, how did they manage it? Enter the pre-meeting buzz. Senators would send out messengers, often young slaves, bless their hearts, to each other's homes to confirm attendance. Hey, Gaius, we're having a Senate meeting on Tuesday. Could you come? We need to make a decision on the tax on fish sauce. And if you thought organizing a meeting was tough, try doing it in the middle of a grain shortage. Yes, logistics extended beyond counting heads. It involved managing supply chains for everything from olive oil to gladiator games. If the populace was hungry, senators might find it a tad challenging to get the quorum they needed. Sorry, I can't make it, there's a riot over the price of bread. And let's not forget the role of political maneuvering. Senators often counted on their allies to show up, and if they didn't, it was common practice to bribe someone to come. Here's a bag of denarii, just walk in and count as present, will you? This created a culture of attendance that was as much about loyalty and bribery as it was about governance. Record keeping with lots of specifics, the devil is in the details. With all this talk of logistics, it's essential to highlight the specifics of record keeping. The Romans were nothing if not detail-oriented. Each senator was assigned a unique number, and attendance was recorded with the precision of a modern-day attendance app. Senator Marcus Tullius Cicero, present. Senator Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, absent. Senator Lucius Cornelius Sulla, snoring. In the spirit of fairness, they also had to account for unique circumstances. A senator could be excused for illness, but if they were ill too often, like, say, every Tuesday, the Senate had the right to raise an eyebrow. Ah, Quintus, you have a chronic illness every time we have to vote on tax reforms. How curious. And if a senator died? Well, that was a whole other administrative nightmare. Their seat would remain empty until the next election cycle, and the Senate would have to adjust the quorum count accordingly. Well, I guess we're operating at a 299 quorum today, but at least the ghost of Senator Maximus isn't voting. One surprising, borderline grotesque anecdote, a quorum of chaos. And now, for the grand finale, let's unveil a rather surprising and borderline grotesque anecdote that embodies the absurdity of quorum counting in the Roman Senate. Picture this: it was a particularly hot day in Rome, and the Senate was gearing up for a crucial vote on military funding. Senators gathered, sweat glistening on their brows as they took their seats. Suddenly, chaos erupted. A senator, let's call him Decimus, had brought along a rather large and unruly goat to the meeting. Why? Who knows? Perhaps he thought it would be a good luck charm, or maybe he just fancied himself a goat farmer. As the Senate convened, the goat, perhaps sensing the tension in the air, decided this was the perfect moment to make a break for it. In a scene that could only be described as a farce, the goat sprinted through the Senate chamber, dodging senators and knocking over precious wax tablets. Senators scrambled to avoid the chaos, some shouting, "Quick, we need a quorum," while others simply laughed at the absurdity of it all. Eventually, the goat was corralled, but not before it made a mess of the Senate floor. The vote was postponed, and senators left the chamber scratching their heads, wondering if they just witnessed a divine sign or merely a reflection of the absurdity of their own political machinations. Conclusion: a legacy of quirks and quorums. So, dear reader, as we conclude our exploration of the thrilling world of Roman Senate quorum counting procedures, let's take a moment to appreciate the quirks, the logistics, and the downright absurdities that accompanied the governance of one of history's most storied empires. From regional variations to the endless paperwork, every detail was crucial in maintaining order. So the next time you're stuck in a dull meeting, remember, at least you're not trying to count heads in a Roman Senate meeting with a goat running amok. In the grand scheme of things, maybe our modern-day bureaucracy isn't so bad after all. The dull history of Roman Senate quorum counting procedures, a surprisingly entertaining odyssey. Once upon a time, in a land where togas were all the rage, and gladiators were the ultimate reality TV stars, the Roman Senate was the epitome of political drama. However, nestled amidst the grandiose speeches and backstabbings, both literal and metaphorical, lay a rather mundane yet vital aspect of governance: the quorum counting procedures. Yes, dear reader, while history books may regale you with tales of emperors and conquests, this is a tale of the ever-so-fascinating world of quorum counting, with all its thrilling regional variations, laws, taxes, logistics, and a dash of grotesque anecdote to keep you on the edge of your seat. ##### the quorum, the unsung hero. First, let's clarify what a quorum is for any budding Roman senator who might be reading this. Simply put, a quorum is the minimum number of members needed to conduct official business. Think of it as the Roman version of, you can't start the meeting until everyone shows up. This is crucial because if a few senators decided that a day of gladiatorial games was more enticing than debating tax laws, the Senate would be rendered as useless as a left-handed hammer. ##### regional variations over time. Now, imagine trying to keep track of quorum counts in the sprawling Roman Empire, where regional variations were as common as bad wine. The Senate, primarily based in Rome, had to consider its provinces, yes, the same provinces that were busy rebelling, trading, and occasionally forgetting which side of the bread was buttered. In the early Republic, a quorum was defined simply, the presence of at least 1/3 of the senators. However, as the empire expanded and the number of senators fluctuated like a toga in a breeze, this number became less reliable. Enter the regional variations. In provinces like Gaul or Hispania, where the local senators might have preferred to spend their time contemplating the best way to cook snails rather than attending Senate meetings, the quorum count might have been a little more lenient. Hey, if we can get at least half of them here, let's call it a win, was likely the prevailing sentiment. Meanwhile, back in Rome, where senators were more likely to take their political responsibilities seriously, perhaps too seriously, as they often turned on one another, the quorum thresholds could be a source of endless debate. You'd have senators arguing about whether a senator who showed up wearing only half a toga should be counted. Spoiler, he was usually not. Hashtag laws, edicts, and taxes, the quorum's role. The quorum counting procedures were not merely a formality, they had real implications for laws, edicts, and taxes. Yes, taxes, the bane of every citizen's existence, from patricians to plebeians. Imagine the scene: a senator stands up, raises his hand, and proclaims, "Let us impose a new tax on olives," but wait, he can't do that unless the quorum is met. The Senate, in its infinite wisdom, established various laws and edicts to streamline the counting process. The Lex Claudia, for instance, was a law that specified how many senators had to be present for decisions on finance. If the quorum was not met, any discussion on taxes would have to wait until such time as the senators could drag themselves away from their luxurious villas or whatever else they found more pressing than governance. But let's not forget the ledgers. Ah, yes, the glories of record-keeping in ancient Rome. The Senate had scribes, bless their souls, tasked with the meticulous job of recording who was present and who was not. This was no simple task, as it involved keeping track of senators who were infamous for their theatrical entrances and exits. Ah, Quintus is late again, he's probably busy adjusting his toga. And let's face it, if a senator decided he'd rather attend a chariot race than a tedious debate on agricultural policy, the scribes had to make a note of that too. Senator Quintus, absent due to chariot race. You can imagine the running tally of excuses that must have accumulated over time. Hashtag logistics and supply chains, the unsung backbone. In the world of quorum counting, logistics was the unsung hero. The very act of getting senators to the Curia, the Senate House, was akin to herding cats. The Senate had to take into account transport options, which in an era of carts, horseback, and the occasional litter, was no small feat. Senators from distant provinces would often find themselves in a race against time, and the clock, to reach Rome in time for a crucial vote. This led to an entire supply chain of logistics, with messengers crisscrossing the empire to remind senators that a quorum was necessary. "Hey, Lucius! You'll miss the vote on the olive tax if you don't leave now," was likely a common refrain. And let's not even start on the supply chain issues they faced. What if a senator got caught in a traffic jam caused by a herd of sheep? Or worse, a parade celebrating a successful military campaign? Hashtag record keeping, a time-consuming affair. Now, if you think that quorum counting was a simple matter of counting heads and calling it a day, think again. The meticulous nature of Roman record-keeping meant that every count had to be documented with the precision of a surgical procedure. The Senate had official logs, the Acta Senatus, where all proceedings, votes, and attendance were recorded. These logs were not just for show, they were legal documents. If a senator tried to pull a fast one by claiming he was present when he wasn't, someone could whip out the acta senatus and say, "Not so fast, buddy. You were off chasing chariots." The record-keeping was so exhaustive that it often included details about what senators were wearing, how long they had been in attendance, and even the nature of their discussions. Senator Gaius was present for 2 hours and wore a particularly fetching green toga, while Senator Marcus spent the time debating the merits of a new hairstyle. ##### A grotesque anecdote to keep things interesting. Now that we've navigated through the soporific details of quorum counting, let's spice things up with a truly grotesque anecdote. It was said that during one particularly heated debate regarding the tax on fish, a senator named Tiberius had an unfortunate incident. In an attempt to illustrate his point about the importance of fresh fish for the economy, Tiberius decided to bring a basket of fish to the Senate. Unfortunately, the fish had seen better days and were rapidly becoming, well, less than fresh. As Tiberius launched into a passionate speech about the economic benefits of a thriving fishing industry, the smell of the rotting fish began to waft through the Senate chamber. Senators started to gag, and one particularly sensitive senator fainted, leading to a chain reaction of chaos. In the ensuing pandemonium, the quorum was lost, and the session had to be adjourned. The Acta Senatus noted that Senator Tiberius was responsible for inducing mass nausea and disrupting the quorum count. This anecdote, while grotesque, serves as a reminder that even the most mundane aspects of governance, like quorum counting, can lead to the most unexpected outcomes. #### Conclusion. The unsung legacy of quorum counting. So there you have it, a witty exploration of the dull yet surprisingly intricate world of Roman Senate quorum counting procedures. From regional variations to laws, logistics, and a touch of grotesque humor, it's clear that quorum counting was far more than just a bureaucratic exercise. It was a vital part of the Roman political machine that kept the wheels of governance turning. In a world where we often overlook the minutiae of history, let us raise a glass of wine, preferably not from the back of a rotting fish, to the unsung heroes of the Roman Senate, the scribes, and the senators who showed up to count heads so that the empire could continue its grand saga of conquest and chaos. After all, behind every great empire lies a well-organized quorum. Cheers! #### The dull history of Roman Senate quorum counting procedures. If you think the Roman Senate was all toga-wearing grandeur and dramatic speeches, think again. Beneath the marble columns of power lay a world of bureaucratic tedium that could put even the most seasoned accountant to sleep. Welcome to the riveting saga of Roman Senate quorum counting procedures, a tale soaked in regional variations, legalese, and the sort of logistics that would make even Amazon Prime weep with envy. #### The quorum, a number worthy of a Senate showdown. First, let's get our ducks in a row, or perhaps our senators. A quorum in the Roman Senate was the magic number of 200 senators required to conduct business. However, this number wasn't just plucked from the ether, it was the result of a highly refined and incredibly dull process. The Romans, ever the pragmatists, realized that without a quorum, their grand plans for world domination, or at least some serious road building, would grind to a halt. But hold your horses. The magic number of 200 wasn't a static figure. Oh no, dear reader, the Romans loved their regional variations. In provinces far and wide, the number could fluctuate based on local customs or the whims of the ruling class. Picture this: a senator in Gaul might say, "We only need 150 for a quorum here," while back in Rome, the senators are adamantly insisting on the full 200. It was like a game of bureaucratic telephone, only with more sandals and less fun. ###### laws, edicts, and the taxing business of taxation. Now, let's wade into the murky waters of laws, edicts, and taxes. The Roman Senate was responsible for legislating everything from public morals, don't even think about wearing that toga too short, to the minutiae of tax collection. The procedures surrounding quorum counting were just as convoluted as the laws they passed. Imagine a senator standing up to propose a new tax. "My fellow senators, we must tax the wealthy," he bellows, only to be met with groans and the sound of more toga fabric rustling than you'd find at a fabric store. But wait! Before any votes can happen, the presiding officer must first ensure there are 200 senators present. Cue the counting. This was no simple head count. It involved checking attendance sheets that were more complex than a papyrus scroll of Homer's works. Every senator was supposed to sign in, and if you thought school attendance was a hassle, you would have hated being a Roman senator. Records had to be meticulously kept, with senators crossing their names off in a way that would make a librarian swoon. "Is this a quorum?" they'd ask, squinting at the list, while a gaggle of senators groaned, "Not until Marcus shows up." ####logistics and supply chains, the unsung heroes of quorum counting. Ah, logistics, the unsung hero of every operation. The Roman Senate wasn't just about heart-stopping rhetoric, it was also about ensuring that all 200 senators, or whatever number they could settle on, could actually make it to the assembly. This was a monumental task, akin to herding cats, except these cats were adorned in togas and had a penchant for getting lost in the winding streets of ancient Rome. Transportation was a logistical nightmare. Some senators lived in the far reaches of the empire, and getting them to Rome on time was akin to booking a last-minute flight during the holidays. Good luck with that. There were chariots, of course, but they could only go so fast, and the likelihood of a senator getting stuck in traffic was alarmingly high. "I swear I saw him on the Appian Way," you could hear one senator exclaim, as they peered out the window for signs of their missing colleague. And let's not forget about supply chains. Senators required food, drink, and, let's face it, a level of comfort befitting their status. You can't expect a senator to show up to vote on the future of the empire without a little something to nibble on, right? Carts filled with figs, olives, and wine would be dispatched, all while someone in the back was counting heads and muttering, "Are we at quorum yet?" ###record keeping, the art of boring documentation. If there's anything that could dull the excitement of Roman politics, it was the joy of record keeping. The scribes, those poor souls, had the thankless job of documenting everything with the precision of a modern-day accountant. Every senator's signature was recorded, every vote tallied, and every quorum officially declared, because heaven forbid the Senate be caught in a scandal of miscounting. The ledgers themselves were works of art, filled with columns and rows that would give any Excel user a run for their money. Ah yes, here we have Gaius, who arrived late because he was busy with his business interests. That's a nice way of saying he was at the Forum betting on chariot races, one scribe might mutter as he scribbled away. But it wasn't just about keeping track of who was there or who wasn't. The Romans had a flair for detail that bordered on obsessive. If a senator voted aye, it was noted in bold. If he voted nay, it was circled in red. And if he abstained, well, let's just say that was noted with an asterisk and an accompanying footnote that explained his reasons, which often involved a family emergency or a sudden onset of the sniffles. Hashtag a surprising, grotesque anecdote. As if the mundanity of quorum counting wasn't enough to make you want to take a nap, let's spice things up with a surprising and borderline grotesque anecdote. It is said that during one particularly contentious period of Senate sessions, the lack of quorum became a dire issue. Senators were missing, and tempers flared. In the midst of this bureaucratic chaos, a rather ambitious senator named Lucius decided to take matters into his own hands. Rumor has it that Lucius was not above a little theatrics to ensure his agenda moved forward. One fateful day, in a desperate bid to gather votes, he concocted a scheme so bizarre that it left everyone questioning his sanity. He hired a troupe of actors to dress as missing senators and parade through the streets of Rome, shouting about the importance of voting. Imagine the sight, a gaggle of men in togas, some of dubious repute, pretending to be senators, trailing a chariot filled with wine and pastries. But here's where it gets grotesque. In a bizarre twist, Lucius decided to up the ante. He arranged for a live pig to be brought to the Senate chambers, claiming it was a sacred offering to the gods to ensure the presence of the absent senators. The sight of a squealing pig being paraded around a somber legislative chamber was enough to turn stomachs. It was said that some senators fainted, while others simply refused to believe what they were witnessing. Is this a quorum or a farce? One senator quipped as the pig snuffled around the feet of the presiding officer. The incident became the talk of the town, adding a layer of absurdity to the otherwise dull proceedings of the Senate. Lucius may not have achieved his desired quorum that day, but he certainly succeeded in igniting a saga of gossip that would echo through the annals of history. Conclusion, the legacy of dullness. So there you have it, a brief journey through the decidedly unglamorous world of Roman Senate quorum counting procedures. From regional variations and convoluted laws to the logistical nightmares of transportation and the drudgery of record-keeping, it's a wonder the Roman Empire lasted as long as it did when its very foundation relied on such dull mechanics. Yet, in the midst of all this tedium, we find humor, absurdity, and a few grotesque tales that remind us of the human element behind the bureaucracy. The Roman Senate may not have been the epitome of excitement, but it was certainly a stage for the oddities of human behavior, where the stakes were high, and the pig was always just around the corner. The dull history of Roman Senate quorum counting procedures. Let's embark on a wild journey through the dusty annals of Roman history, where the thrills of gladiatorial combat and the artistry of sculpture can sometimes be overshadowed by the riveting world of quorum counting in the Senate. Yes, you heard that right. The Roman Senate, those sharp-dressed gentlemen of antiquity, were not just busy plotting world domination and philosophizing about virtue, they were also deeply engrossed in the excitingly mundane task of counting heads to see if they had enough senators to make any decisions. And believe me, it was as thrilling as watching paint dry. Hashtag regional variations over time. First off, let's talk about how this thrilling pastime varied across the vast expanses of the Roman Empire. Rome wasn't just a city, it was a sprawling behemoth comprising various regions, each with its own quirks and eccentricities. The Senate, in its glory days, was like that hipster cafe in your neighborhood, slightly different in every location, but ultimately just a place to sip on something bitter and complain about the state of the world. In the early days of the Republic, you could find senators counting heads in the Forum, where senators would gather and debate like over-caffeinated college students. The quorum was a mere 100 senators, and they often huddled together, counting by hand and using their toes when things got really desperate. Fast forward to the late Republic, and suddenly you had a plethora of regional variations. A quorum in Hispania might consist of a few senators who were less interested in actual governance and more interested in their vineyards, while in Gaul, the senators were adept at counting both heads and the number of Gaulish warriors nearby, just in case they needed to call in reinforcements. As time marched on, the Senate saw changes, from a more democratic approach to an oligarchical stranglehold. The quorum counting procedures evolved, with new laws and edicts dictating how many senators were needed to pass a tax or approve a military campaign. In the provinces, the concept of a quorum could get downright slippery, depending on whether the local governor had his fingers in some particularly lucrative pies. Hashtag laws, edicts, taxes, and ledgers. Now, let's dig into the nitty-gritty of laws, edicts, and taxes. The Roman legal system was like a labyrinth filled with red tape, and the quorum counting was no exception. You see, the Senate had a penchant for creating laws that required more than just a simple head count. No. They loved complexity like a cat loves knocking things off a table. In 367 BC, for instance, the Lex Licinia Sextia decreed that one of the two consuls must be a plebeian. Great, right? But wait. To pass such a law, a quorum was essential. Picture the senators, clad in togas, frantically counting each other, all while trying to remember the specifics of the law they were about to vote on. You could almost hear the groans of, "Who's got the scroll?" echoing through the marble halls. Taxes were another delightful headache. The Senate would often have to summon a quorum to decide on tax assessments, which were as popular as a dentist's appointment. The debate would rage, senators arguing over the merits of taxing olives versus grapes, all while the tax collectors waited, probably sipping wine and wondering what on earth they'd done to deserve this. Once a consensus was reached, the logistics of record-keeping came into play. Senators had to jot down not only the decisions made but also who voted which way, a task that required the patience of a saint and the organizational skills of a librarian. Ledgers were filled with ink as senators scrawled their names, sometimes accompanied by a hastily drawn doodle of a toga. Here lies the record of the great olive tax of 52 BC, they might have written, voted on by 150 senators, 20 of whom were definitely not paying attention. #### logistics and supply chains. Now, let's talk logistics because, believe it or not, quorum counting was not just about counting heads, it was also about managing supply chains. Imagine a world without Amazon Prime. How did they ever manage to get senators to Rome in time for a quorum? The logistics must have been a nightmare. Senators were scattered across the empire, from the bustling streets of Alexandria to the windswept hills of Britannia. When a session was called, it was up to the heralds to send word far and wide. They'd gallop on horseback, shouting, "Senators, assemble! We need to count you like sheep." And heavens help the poor senator who arrived late. Picture him, breathless and disheveled, bursting into the Senate chambers only to find the quorum already established. "Sorry, buddy, you're just in time to hear about the great olive tax debate," they'd say, while the latecomer slinks off to the corner, nursing his bruised ego. The supply chain was not just about getting senators to the forum, it also involved ensuring they had the essentials, food, drink, and an ever-present supply of scrolls. If a senator got peckish during a particularly drawn-out quorum count, you could bet the discussion would veer off course. "Is that a fig? I can't concentrate on this quorum while I'm starving. Pass the olives." Suddenly, you've got a full-blown debate on the merits of figs versus olives, and the actual quorum count. Well, that's gone right out the window. #### record keeping with lots of specifics. When it came to record keeping, the Senate had a system that would make any modern bureaucrat weep with joy, or horror, depending on your perspective. Each senator had a wax tablet, and when it came time to document the quorum, they would scratch down their names with a stylus, sometimes while simultaneously trying to remember which way they intended to vote. Did I say aye or nay? Perhaps I should just write maybe and call it a day. The record-keeping procedures had their charms. In 63 BC, during the Catalan conspiracy, the senators were so engrossed in the drama that they almost forgot to count their numbers. Picture Cicero, waving his arms around, yelling, "Count the traitors," while the actual task of counting the loyal senators was left hanging like a half-finished toga. The records for that period were a hot mess, with names crossed out and arrows pointing to random sketches of goats. And let's not forget the infamous quorum quibbles, where miscounts could lead to disastrous outcomes. If a senator accidentally miscounted and declared a quorum when there wasn't one, it could lead to chaos. "I swear I counted 61, but I miscounted the guy in the back with the bad haircut." Oh, the scandal! The gossip! How could they trust him to lead us into battle when he can't even count to 60? ###one surprising, borderline grotesque anecdote. Now for the piece de resistance, a grotesque anecdote that will make you thank the gods you live in the 21st century. Picture this. It was a warm summer day in 44 BC, and Julius Caesar was set to address the Senate. The tension was palpable. The senators were buzzing about the impending vote on Caesar's powers. But before they could even count heads, one of the senators, let's call him Gaius, suddenly felt the need to relieve himself. Underestimating the urgency of his bodily functions, Gaius dashed out of the Senate chamber, only to trip over a toga and faceplant into the ornamental fountain. Now, this was no ordinary fountain. It had been recently filled with fresh fish for a banquet that evening. As Gaius flailed about, trying to regain his dignity, he sent fish flying in all directions. The senators, watching this unfold, erupted into laughter, completely forgetting about the quorum count. In the chaos, the Senate was left without a quorum, and the critical vote on Caesar's powers was postponed. The story spread like wildfire, and Gaius became the laughingstock of Rome. Here's the senator who couldn't even count to 2 before taking a dive into the fish tank. They'd joke for generations. #conclusion. So, there you have it, the riveting, slightly absurd world of Roman Senate quorum counting procedures. While the tales of gladiators and emperors may steal the spotlight, let us not forget the unsung heroes of counting heads and keeping track of votes. In a world filled with chaos, they grappled with the weighty responsibility of governance, one painfully tedious quorum at a time. Next time you glance at your watch, waiting for a meeting to start, spare a thought for those toga-clad senators of yore, who had their own set of challenges. Because if there's one thing we've learned from the annals of history, it's that whether you're in ancient Rome or the modern world, counting heads is a task best undertaken with a sense of humor, and perhaps a few olives on hand. The dull history of Roman Senate quorum counting procedures. Ah, the Roman Senate. A grand institution of governance that has given us more Latin phrases than we can shake a toga at, and yet, somehow, it is still more riveting than watching paint dry, or, more accurately, watching a particularly slow-growing vine. But before we dive into the thrilling world of quorum counting procedures, let's set the stage. Imagine the Senate chamber, with its marble columns and senators dressed in togas, all engaged in a riveting discussion about taxes. Yes, taxes. Because, after all, nothing screams fun like a conversation about public finance in ancient Rome. Now, quorum counting procedures may not sound like the stuff of epic tales, but buckle up, dear reader. We're about to embark on a journey through time, space, and the minutiae of bureaucratic drudgery that would make even the most enthusiastic history buff yawn. Along the way, we'll encounter regional variations, laws, edicts, taxes, logistics, record-keeping, and, just for fun, a surprisingly grotesque anecdote that will leave you wondering if perhaps you've wandered into the wrong part of the library. First, let's address the regional variations over time. If you thought that the Roman Empire was a monolithic structure, think again. The Senate's quorum counting procedures varied wildly across different provinces and epochs, much like fashion trends. In the early days of the Republic, a quorum was defined as a mere majority of the 300 senators, which, given the number of toga-clad individuals who often found their way into the chamber, was more a suggestion than a hard and fast rule. Fast forward to the late Republic, when the number of senators had swelled, and suddenly achieving a quorum became akin to herding cats, very well-dressed, slightly confused cats. In some provinces, they even instituted a two-thirds rule, presumably to ensure that the loudest senators, who often doubled as the most dramatic, could not hijack the proceedings with their impassioned speeches about, say, the virtues of olive oil or the latest gladiatorial contest. Laws and edicts, of course, played a significant role in shaping these procedures. The Lex Tullia de Ambitu, for instance, set forth some rather elaborate rules concerning the conduct of elections, which naturally spilled over into the realm of quorum counting. By the time Augustus strutted onto the scene, the Senate had become an institution so bogged down in legalese that it would take a team of lawyers and a dozen scrolls just to determine if they had enough senators to start a meeting. And let's not forget taxes. Taxes, the lifeblood of any good government, and the bane of every citizen's existence. In Rome, tax discussions often morphed into fierce debates about what constituted a quorum. Are we counting the senators who owe taxes? What about those who have been exiled? Do we include the ones who are currently in the midst of a particularly long-winded speech about the merits of the aqueduct system? Such questions filled the Senate chamber with more tension than a gladiatorial match, though far fewer lions were involved. Now, logistics and supply chains may seem like topics reserved for your friendly neighborhood business major, but in Rome, they were the stuff of political intrigue. Senators had to be physically present to vote, which meant that someone had to keep track of who was actually in attendance. Enter the census, a term that would make any modern-day accountant drool with envy. The Romans were meticulous record keepers, going so far as to count the number of votes and track senators' attendance with the fervor of a high school teacher tallying up tardies. But the logistics didn't stop there. Imagine the chaos of attempting to secure a quorum when some senators were gallivanting around far-flung provinces. You'd have senators in Gaul, some in Hispania, and others attending to personal matters in the Mediterranean, like perfecting their beach bogs. The Senate had to establish strict guidelines for attendance, leading to a rather elaborate system where letters were sent via couriers to ensure that senators knew when their presence was required. If only they had known about Zoom. As for record keeping, the Romans took this to an art form. They had a plethora of ledgers, scrolls, and tablets filled with details that would make a modern-day auditor weep with joy. The Acta Senatus kept track of everything discussed during meetings, while the tabulae recorded the votes. Imagine a room filled with clerks, furiously scratching away at wax tablets, trying to keep up with the lively banter of senators arguing over the finer points of agrarian reform. Spoiler alert, it was not pretty. But let's not forget the all-important surprise, a grotesque anecdote that will leave you questioning the very fabric of Roman political life. One fateful day, during a particularly heated debate about whether or not to impose a new tax on garum, that delicious fish sauce that was the ketchup of its day, a senator named Gaius Licinius was so incensed by the opposition's stance that he stormed out of the chamber. In a fit of rage, he decided to take matters into his own hands and, in a bizarre turn of events, attempted to conduct his own quorum count by summoning a gaggle of geese from a nearby market. Yes, you read that correctly. Gaius, convinced that the Senate had lost its way, thought it wise to replace his fellow senators with a flock of honking, flapping fowl. As he stood there, arms flailing, demanding that the geese vote on the tax, the remaining senators were left utterly baffled. Reports claim that the geese were quite vocal about their opinions on the matter, though they ultimately failed to provide a legal quorum. The spectacle escalated when the Senate censors arrived, aghast at the sight of a senator surrounded by birds, flapping their wings and honking loudly. "This is not how we conduct business in Rome," they proclaimed, as Gaius defended his choice with impassioned rhetoric about the virtues of avian representation. Needless to say, Gaius was swiftly removed from the chamber, and the incident became the stuff of legend, an example of how, even in the grand halls of power, the absurd can rear its head. It also served as a cautionary tale to the rest of the senators about the importance of maintaining a quorum and the potential consequences of losing one's temper. In conclusion, the history of Roman Senate quorum counting procedures may not be the most scintillating subject matter, but it reveals the complexities of governance in a society that prided itself on order and structure. From regional variations and endless debates about taxes to meticulous record-keeping and the bizarre antics of a senator with a penchant for poultry, the story is a reminder that even the most serious institutions can be tinged with absurdity. So, the next time you find yourself stuck in a bureaucratic meeting that feels like it's dragging on forever, just remember, at least you're not trying to count a quorum with geese. #### The dull history of Roman Senate quorum counting procedures. When one thinks of the Roman Senate, grand spectacles of political maneuvering, eloquent speeches, and the fateful decisions that shaped a civilization come to mind. However, beneath this illustrious veneer lies an often overlooked, yet crucial aspect of governance: the mundane mechanics of quorum counting. This seemingly trivial task was essential to the functioning of the Senate, and it reflects the intricate web of minor figures and petty rules that characterized Roman political life. #### Minor figures and petty rules. To understand the quorum counting procedures, we must first familiarize ourselves with some of the lesser-known figures who played significant roles in this process. Among these were the censors, who were responsible not only for maintaining the census but also for overseeing the moral integrity of the Senate. Although their duties were much grander in scope, they were often called upon to ensure that the requisite number of senators were present to conduct official business. Additionally, there were the praetors, who occasionally presided over Senate meetings. Their role in counting quorum was largely perfunctory. They would often call for a show of hands or a verbal acknowledgement of presence, which, on a busy day, could lead to chaos. Imagine senators arguing over whether a colleague was truly present or simply lurking in the shadows of the Curia, the Senate House. This led to the establishment of minor rules, such as the requirement for senators to be physically present and not merely represented by proxies, a practice that was rife with loopholes. Compounding these issues were the senatorial decurions, who were responsible for maintaining order during proceedings. Their role in ensuring that quorum was met often resulted in bizarre incidents, such as the infamous incident of 58 BCE, when a decurion mistakenly counted a statue of a senator as present, leading to a major uproar and a call for stricter regulations on counting procedures. ### Case studies with dates and lists. One of the most notable instances of quorum counting occurred during the tumultuous period of the late Republic. On March 15, 44 BCE, after the assassination of Julius Caesar, the Senate convened in a state of palpable tension. In an effort to establish legitimacy in the face of upheaval, a quorum of at least 300 senators was required to discuss Caesar's successor. However, the attendance was far lower than expected, leading to an impromptu roll call that revealed just 219 senators present. This failure to meet quorum led to immediate discussions about potential reforms to the Senate's attendance policies. The following year, on April 8, 43 BCE, the Senate faced a similar crisis. A significant debate on the legitimacy of the Second Triumvirate was set to take place, but only 287 senators showed up. This time, the lack of quorum sparked a heated debate over the implications of political attendance, as some senators argued that those who failed to attend were essentially abdicating their responsibilities to the Republic. In both instances, the counting procedures, though seemingly trivial, had profound implications for the political landscape of Rome. The inability to reach quorum not only stalled legislative processes but also exposed the underlying fractures within the Senate itself. Comparisons to other regions. When examining the Roman Senate's quorum counting, it is fascinating to compare it with other political systems of the time. In ancient Greece, for example, the Athenian assembly operated under a different system. Unlike the Roman Senate, where a quorum required a set number of senators, the Athenian assembly was much more democratic and required a simple majority of those present. This often led to larger assemblies, with attendance sometimes exceeding 6,000 citizens. Their counting methods were simpler, often depending on a show of hands or voice votes, which were prone to manipulation and chaos. In contrast, the Persian Empire's governance structure relied on the Council of the Seven, where quorum was not an issue due to the smaller size of the council. Their decisions were made behind closed doors, and the lack of a formal quorum requirement allowed for swifter decision-making. This highlights a stark difference in governance philosophies, the Romans' emphasis on formalities versus the Greeks' inclination towards direct democracy. Archaeological tidbits. Archaeological discoveries have shed light on the Roman Senate's quorum counting procedures, revealing both the physical spaces where these discussions took place and the artifacts that signify the importance of attendance. One such discovery was the Curia Julia, the Senate house built by Julius Caesar. Excavations of this structure have uncovered inscriptions and seating arrangements that suggest a highly organized environment, where every senator had a designated seat, thus facilitating easier counting of attendees. Moreover, finds from the Roman Forum reveal numerous tokens that were possibly used to mark attendance. These tokens, often made of clay or wood, were inscribed with the names of senators and were used to tally attendance. A particularly notable find from a dig in Ostia Antica in the late 20th century included a collection of these tokens, providing intriguing insight into the bureaucratic nature of Roman governance. The role of minor figures in quorum counting. The role of minor figures in quorum counting cannot be overstated. For instance, the aediles, responsible for public games and the maintenance of public buildings, sometimes found themselves embroiled in Senate proceedings. Their attendance was not mandatory, yet many chose to attend out of political necessity. On occasions, aediles would bring along their entourage, further complicating the counting process. In 47 BCE, a particularly chaotic Senate meeting saw 5 aediles present with a group of supporters, leading to the mistaken belief that the total number of senators present was larger than it actually was. Additionally, the scribes employed by the Senate played a crucial role in recording attendance and decisions. These scribes, often overlooked, held immense power over the documentation of proceedings, including the official count of those present. A famous incident from 27 BCE reveals that a scribe miscounted the senators present, leading to a heated debate over the legitimacy of decisions made during that session. This incident sparked discussions about the importance of accurate record-keeping and the potential consequences of minor errors in such a high-stakes environment. ######### Rhetorical questions that hook curiosity. Is it possible that the fate of the Roman Republic hinged not just on grand speeches and decisive battles, but on the often overlooked minutiae of quorum counting? What hidden tensions and political intrigue lay beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered in the dusty scrolls of history? Conclusion. The history of Roman Senate quorum counting procedures may seem dull at first glance, but it is, in fact, a fascinating tapestry woven from the threads of minor figures, petty rules, and the political drama of the time. The quirks of counting procedures, the chaos of attendance, and the impact on significant political decisions reveal a more nuanced understanding of Roman governance. In an era where every senator's presence, or absence, could tilt the balance of power, these seemingly trivial details take on a weighty significance. As we delve into the archives of history, we uncover the meticulous nature of Roman political life, where even the most mundane aspects of governance played pivotal roles in shaping the destiny of an empire. Through this lens, we come to appreciate not just the grand narratives of history, but also the finer details that make it all the more compelling. The history of the Roman Senate, often perceived as a bastion of political intrigue and power struggles, is also punctuated by the tedious minutiae of its quorum counting procedures. While the grand debates and momentous decisions dominate the historical narrative, the everyday operations of the Senate often reveal a more mundane, yet equally fascinating, aspect of Roman governance. Minor figures and petty rules. At the heart of this bureaucratic labyrinth were numerous minor figures, often overlooked by historians. Take, for example, the lictors, the attendants who accompanied magistrates and were responsible for maintaining order during Senate meetings. More than mere enforcers, they played a crucial role in counting the quorum. In a city as populous as Rome, where attendance could swing wildly based on the political climate, their role became vital in ensuring that the Senate could proceed with its business. The quorum required for a Senate meeting was typically set at 100 senators, a seemingly straightforward figure that belied the complexities involved in achieving it. The senators were often summoned by a preco, a public crier, whose proclamations could vary in tone and urgency depending on the situation. Minor rules dictated that if a senator was late, they could lose their chance to vote on key issues, a practice that led to the infamous senatorial run, where senators would race to the curia, often with sandals in hand, to avoid being counted as absent. ####Case studies with dates and lists. One particularly illustrative case occurred in 63 BCE during the conspiracy of Catiline, when the Senate was tasked with responding to urgent threats against the Republic. On this occasion, the attendance was notably low, leading to a frantic counting process. The consul, Cicero, was determined to rally the Senate and called for a count. The records from that day noted an attendance of 90 senators, leading to a chaotic scene as he implored absent senators to rush to the curia. This day serves as a case study in quorum counting, showcasing the tension between the necessity of the quorum and the reality of political engagement. Another notable instance occurred in 49 BCE, when Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon. In the ensuing months, the Senate faced challenges in maintaining a quorum as factions began to fracture. On March 17 of that year, records indicate that only 85 senators were present for a critical vote regarding the military command in Gaul. The absence of key figures like Pompey and Crassus highlighted political divisions and forced the Senate to reconsider its quorum requirements. This led to debates about whether a smaller quorum could suffice in times of crisis. Comparisons to other regions. When compared to other governing bodies of the time, the Roman Senate's quorum rules reflect a unique blend of democratic principles and oligarchic tendencies. In ancient Greece, for instance, the ecclesia required only a minimal number of citizens to conduct business, often leading to greater participation from the populace. In contrast, the Roman Senate's stringent quorum reflected its elite nature, where power was concentrated among the patricians and wealthy plebeians. In the Eastern cultures, such as the Persian Empire, the concept of a quorum was largely irrelevant. Decisions were often made at the whim of the king or a small council of advisors, reflecting a more autocratic style of governance. The Roman Senate, therefore, stands out for its attempts to incorporate a semblance of collective decision-making, albeit heavily skewed in favor of the elite. Archaeological tidbits. Archaeological evidence sheds light on the mechanisms of quorum counting and the broader political climate of the time. For instance, a cache of tablets discovered in the Roman Forum includes a list of senators present at key meetings, along with notes on their voting patterns. This particular find, dated to the late Republic, provides insight not only into who attended but also highlights the political affiliations and alliances that often dictated attendance. Furthermore, remnants of the curia itself, where the Senate convened, reveal the physical space in which these quorum counts took place. The curia's structure, with its imposing columns and elevated platform, was designed to instill a sense of gravity in proceedings. The architectural layout also facilitated the visibility of senators, allowing for easier counting and oversight, reflecting the Senate's desire for transparency in a system frequently marred by intrigue. ###Rhetorical questions. But what truly drove senators to risk life and limb to be present for these monotonous quorum counts? Was it mere ambition, or did the weight of collective decision-making imbue these procedures with a sense of purpose beyond the mundane? As we delve deeper into the dull history of Roman Senate quorum counting, we uncover not just a series of petty rules but a complex interplay of power dynamics and political maneuvering. #### The political landscape of quorum counting. The political landscape in Rome was fraught with tension, and the quorum counting procedures became a reflection of these larger struggles. The presence or absence of particular senators could sway votes and influence the course of history. The practice of counting senators also gave rise to a culture of political maneuvering, where alliances were formed and broken based on attendance. In one notable incident from 44 BCE, shortly after Caesar's assassination, Mark Antony faced a particularly challenging Senate session. With a quorum of only 95 senators, he attempted to push through a controversial agenda. The absence of key figures like Brutus and Cassius caused significant unrest among the remaining senators. The counting process became a focal point of the session, with each senator's presence scrutinized and debated. Interestingly, this incident provides insight into how the simple act of counting could become a political weapon. Senators would often feign illness or absence to avoid contentious votes, further complicating quorum counting. The Lex Curiata de Imperio, a law governing military commands, required a quorum for certain decisions, but the interpretation of what constituted a quorum often became a point of contention, leading to political battles that extended far beyond the counting room. ###The role of the people. The relationship between the Senate and the Roman populace also played a role in quorum counting. The Senate, while composed of an elite class, was still subject to the will of the people. In moments of significant public outcry or unrest, attendance often swelled as senators sought to curry favor with the public. The famous bread and circuses policy emerged partly in response to the Senate's need to maintain public support, illustrating how the counting of senators was intertwined with broader societal dynamics. In contrast, during periods of stability when the populace felt secure, attendance would dwindle, prompting discussions on whether the quorum requirements should be adjusted. This cyclical nature of attendance highlights how the Senate's procedures were not merely bureaucratic but deeply connected to the pulse of Roman society. ###Conclusion. The seemingly dull history of Roman Senate quorum counting procedures reveals a rich tapestry of political maneuvering, societal dynamics, and historical significance. From minor figures like the lictors to the grand debates of the Senate floor, every aspect of quorum counting contributed to the fabric of Roman governance. As we reflect on these practices, we are left with the understanding that even the most mundane procedures can have profound implications for the course of history. The Roman Senate's approach to quorum counting, while tedious on the surface, was a crucial element in the functioning of one of history's most fascinating political institutions. In a world increasingly driven by the need for efficiency, one must wonder, could the meticulousness of Rome's quorum counting serve as a cautionary tale for modern governance? And might the lessons learned from such a seemingly trivial practice offer insights into the complexities of political engagement today? The Roman Senate, a venerable institution steeped in centuries of tradition, has often been the subject of a collective yawn among historians and laypeople alike. Yet, behind the seemingly mundane procedures of quorum counting lies a tapestry of minor figures, petty rules, and fascinating case studies that reveal the often overlooked drama of Roman political life. Imagine a bustling chamber filled with senators, their togas shimmering in the flickering light of oil lamps, all while the fate of the republic hangs in the balance. If only they could agree on how many senators need to be present to make a decision. Hashtag minor figures and petty rules. In the grand theatricality of Roman politics, the major actors, like Cicero, Caesar, and Augustus, often overshadow lesser-known figures who played crucial roles in the Senate's functioning. These minor figures, often forgotten by history, were responsible for enforcing the Senate's rules and managing quorum counts. One such figure was the praefectus urbi, a sort of urban prefect responsible for maintaining order within the city, including the Senate. His job became particularly tedious during quorum counts, as he had to ensure that enough senators were present to pass legislation. The rules surrounding quorum counting were remarkably specific and often petty. The Senate required a minimum of quorum, typically set at 1/2 plus 1 of the total membership, which fluctuated throughout the Republic and Empire. Senators were often summoned by the censors, who would ensure that the lists were accurate. However, discrepancies in attendance were common, leading to disputes over who was officially recognized as present. For instance, in 63 BCE, during a meeting called to discuss the Catalan conspiracy, Cicero found himself in a precarious situation. A quorum was needed, but several senators were absent, either due to illness or political maneuvering. To resolve the issue, Cicero famously invoked the presence of Lucius Sergius Catilina himself, arguing that the very notion of his conspiracy warranted an emergency session, even if not all senators were present. This incident illustrates how petty disputes over attendance could take on monumental significance, influencing the course of Roman history. Hashtag case studies with dates and lists. The history of quorum counting in the Senate is punctuated with various case studies that highlight the absurdity and importance of these procedures. Consider the debacle of 31 BCE, when Octavian sought to consolidate his power in Rome. During a crucial Senate meeting, he needed to secure a quorum to pass legislation that would legitimize his rule. However, many senators were strategically absent, fearing his growing influence. In response, Octavian called for a list of senators who were in attendance and those who were not. The list revealed that Senator Lucius Marcius Philippus had been out of town, supposedly attending to family affairs, while Senator Marcus Tullius Cicero was counted as present, despite being dead for several months. This farcical situation forced Octavian to rethink his strategies, ultimately leading to further purges of the Senate, where he eliminated those he deemed unworthy, or merely absent. Another fascinating case occurred in 89 BCE, during the tumultuous period of the Social War. The Senate was called to discuss the potential granting of citizenship to the Italian allies. The attendance count was crucial, however. An unexpected storm delayed many senators. The censors were forced to count the senators who arrived late, leading to a heated debate over whether the latecomers should be counted toward the quorum. This incident illustrated the absurdity of the rules, as some senators, including Gaius Marius, argued passionately that any senator present should be counted, while others insisted on a strict interpretation of the rules. This debate led to a raucous session that delayed the vote for days and ignited factional tensions. Comparisons to other regions. To fully appreciate the quirks of Roman quorum counting, it is enlightening to look at how other regions approached similar issues. In Athens, for instance, the assembly required a quorum of 6,000 citizens to convene, a number that was often hard to meet, leading to the practice of lottery systems to ensure attendance. If attendance was low, they would adjourn and reconvene later, emphasizing the democratic nature of their assembly. In stark contrast, the Roman Senate's reliance on individual attendance and the often petty disputes that arose from it led to a distinct form of political maneuvering. Senators often engaged in strategic absences, knowing that their absence could tilt the balance of power within the Senate. This was a game of chess, where each move could shift the entire political landscape. In India, during the Maurya Empire, the Rajya Sabha had a different take on quorum. Their councils required only a simple majority for decisions, which allowed for greater flexibility in governance. This made it easier to convene meetings and push through critical legislation, unlike the Roman Senate, where the rigid rules often led to deadlocks and prolonged debates. Archaeological tidbits. Archaeological finds have also shed light on the minutiae of Roman Senate procedures. In Pompeii, excavations revealed a tablet, inscribed with a list of senators and their attendance records, providing concrete evidence of how quorum counts were meticulously documented. The tablet featured not just names but also annotations indicating whether senators were present or absent, sometimes accompanied by reasons for their absences. Another intriguing find was a small bronze bell discovered among the ruins of a villa in Ostia. It is believed to have been used to summon senators to the Senate House when a quorum was in question. The bell's inscriptions included phrases like, "To the Honorable Assembly," emphasizing the weighty nature of the proceedings, even as the mechanics of counting were fraught with difficulty. Rhetorical questions to hook curiosity. Have you ever considered the significance of a single absent senator in the grand tapestry of history? Or pondered how the petty disputes of a few could shift the balance of power in one of the greatest empires the world has ever known? Conclusion. The seemingly dull history of Roman Senate quorum counting procedures is anything but mundane when one delves into the details. The minor figures, petty rules, and case studies reveal a vibrant political landscape where every senator's presence or absence could have monumental implications. The rigid quorum requirements, which dictated the pace and nature of Roman governance, became battlegrounds for political maneuvering, showcasing the interplay of power, strategy, and human nature. The comparisons to other regions underscore the uniqueness of Roman political culture, as their rules fostered a distinct form of governance that would shape the course of history. Archaeological finds bring to life the often overlooked details of these procedures, reminding us that history is often found in the minutiae. In exploring the quirks of quorum counting, we uncover a rich narrative that illustrates the complexities of Roman political life. So, the next time you think of the Roman Senate, remember it was not merely a collection of powerful men discussing grand ideas but a stage where the smallest details could lead to the most significant consequences. The dull history of Roman Senate quorum counting procedures. To the casual observer, the Roman Senate may seem like a bastion of political intrigue and grandeur, yet beneath its storied facade lies a world of minutiae that would make even the most ardent history buff yawn. One such arcane aspect of this illustrious institution is the seemingly pedestrian yet crucial practice of quorum counting, a process that dictated the very legitimacy of Senate proceedings. The history of Roman Senate quorum counting is riddled with minor figures, petty rules, and a surprising number of quirks that paint a vivid picture of an institution grappling with its own complexities. Minor figures and petty rules. While the names of famed senators such as Cicero and Julius Caesar dominate historical narratives, a host of lesser-known figures played pivotal roles in the day-to-day functioning of the Senate. One such figure was the custos senatus, a minor official tasked with maintaining order and ensuring that the number of senators present met the quorum threshold. The position was often filled by a senator who was deemed particularly dull, perhaps as a way to mitigate any potential for disruption during quorum calls. The quorum itself was a petty rule that could incite fierce debates. While it may seem straightforward, the specifics of quorum requirements varied throughout Roman history. Initially, a simple majority was sufficient, but as the Senate became more influential, the quorum threshold rose to 2/3 of the total membership. This shift led to comical instances where senators would count heads in a manner reminiscent of schoolchildren checking attendance. The phrase, numera, numera, count, count, echoed through the marble halls as senators sought to ensure that enough of their peers were present to validate their discussions. Case studies with dates and lists. One particularly memorable case occurred in 63 BCE, during the fateful Catalan conspiracy. As tensions mounted within the Senate, Cicero, then consul, called for an emergency session to address the threat posed by Lucius Sergius Catilina. The quorum was called into question amid accusations that certain senators were conspiring with Catiline himself. The roll call, conducted with all the gravity of a soldier's muster, resulted in a paltry 30 out of 600 senators present, leading to an uproar. Senators shouted, "Where is the ghost of the Republic?" as they realized that their deliberations were rendered moot without a full quorum. In 49 BCE, the Senate faced a similar predicament when Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon, prompting a heated debate over the legitimacy of his actions. The Senate convened to discuss the crisis, but a quorum was not reached until Gaius Cassius Longinus, the custos senatus, made a dramatic entrance, having been delayed by a particularly lengthy toga adjustment. His arrival brought the number of senators present to 300, allowing the Senate to debate the matter of Caesar's allegiance. It was a classic case of fashion over function, where a senator's attire could alter the course of history. Comparisons to other regions. The Roman Senate's approach to quorum counting was not unique. Similar practices were found in various political institutions across the ancient world. For instance, in the Greek city-states, particularly Athens, quorum counting was equally important, but the criteria were surprisingly more lenient. An assembly required only a small portion of its members to be present, typically a mere 6,000 citizens, due to the sheer size of the population participating in direct democracy. This contrasts sharply with the Roman model, which relied on a relatively small group of elite individuals to make decisions for the entire republic. In contrast, the Persian Empire, under Darius I, had a much more centralized system. The king made decrees that were often unchallenged by a council, as the political structure allowed little room for debate. The absence of a formal quorum requirement meant that decisions could be made swiftly, albeit at the expense of the collective voice of the nobility. This highlights the diverse approaches to governance in the ancient world, revealing that while Rome's dedication to Senate quorum counting seemed tedious, it was a hallmark of its commitment to republican ideals. Archaeological tidbits. Archaeological finds have provided tantalizing glimpses into the mundane yet essential practices of Roman politics. In 2010, excavations in the Forum Romanum uncovered a well-preserved tablet that detailed the quorum requirements for various Senate sessions during the late Republic. This tablet, inscribed with the names of senators and their attendance records, revealed not only the rigid attendance expectations but also the notable absences of certain senators, who were often too busy attending lavish feasts or participating in gladiatorial games to fulfill their civic duties. Moreover, the discovery of a series of pictorial friezes depicting quorum counting in action at the Curia Julia, the Senate House, showcased senators engaged in animated discussions, some with scrolls in hand, while others appeared to be napping, a testament to the soporific nature of some debates. These artifacts serve as a reminder that behind the grand narratives of Roman politics lay a cast of characters whose lives were often as mundane as they were monumental. 2 rhetorical questions. As we delve into the minutiae of quorum counting, one must ponder, what might the legacy of the Roman Senate look like if those petty rules had been ignored? Could the fate of the Republic have been altered by a simple lack of attendance? Furthermore, as we examine the everyday lives of these senators, we must ask ourselves, what does it say about the nature of power and responsibility that a single senator's toga could change the course of history? In conclusion, the history of Roman Senate quorum counting is a tapestry of minor figures, petty rules, and unexpected drama. While it may seem dull at first glance, the implications of these procedures resonate through history, reminding us that even the most tedious aspects of governance can have profound consequences. And that's a wrap. Today, we dove into some wild facts that'll have you questioning everything you thought you knew. Who knew octopuses could taste with their arms? Just when you think you've seen it all, the ocean throws a curveball. Here's a surprising tidbit: did you know that honey never spoils? Archaeologists have found pots of honey in ancient Egyptian tombs that are over 3,000 years old and still perfectly edible. Talk about a sweet deal. If you enjoyed this dive into the deep end of knowledge, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below with your favorite fact. And for more mind-blowing episodes, check out our related videos that will keep your curiosity buzzing. Lastly, make sure to turn on loop so this episode plays on repeat until you drift off to dreamland. Sweet dreams and see you next time.